Happy Saturday, everybody. Welcome to a special extra weekend edition of China Update, where we discuss leading political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Like I said, this is an extra episode. I thought we'd take the weekend off, but unfortunately there are a couple of big developments we need to cover, and I also wanted to take this opportunity to do a deep dive into the state of affairs for China's wider industrial situation through the case study of EVs. It is a big story that the world has been watching, but there is a lot of trouble in paradise, and so we'll be discussing that in a deep dive today as well. Now, it is the weekend, so I will try and keep it light and short, so let's jump in. First up, we continue our ongoing coverage of the US-China trade and technology war. US President Donald Trump sought to lower tensions with Beijing on yesterday, saying that the steep tariffs he had threatened on Chinese imports were, quote, not sustainable, end quote, and signaling renewed optimism about a potential breakthrough in talks with General Secretary Xi Jinping. The comments mark a notable shift in tone after weeks of escalating rhetoric between the world's two largest economies. In an interview with Fox Business, Trump acknowledged that the levies, set to climb as high as 145% on Chinese goods, could damage both economies. Quote, it is not sustainable, end quote, he said, adding that while the tariffs, quote, could stand, end quote, China had, quote, forced me to do that, end quote. His remarks appeared aimed at easing market concerns about a potential trade rupture that could drag on global growth. Later, at a White House event, the US president reiterated his belief that relations with Beijing were improving. Quote, I think we're doing very well. I think we're getting along with China, end quote, he said, confirming that his planned face-to-face meeting with Xi on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in South Korea, quote, looks like it's going forward, end quote. The more conciliatory tone came as Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced that he will speak with Chinese Vice Premier He Fang on Friday evening and meet him in Malaysia next week to prepare for the presidential summit. Quote, I think things have de-escalated, end quote, Bessent said, expressing confidence that Trump's relationship with Xi could, quote, get things back on a good course, end quote. We remember earlier this week, US officials expressed frustration that they were unable to get He Fang on the phone. This outrage follows a turbulent week in which Trump floated cancelling the Xi meeting and imposing 100% tariffs on Chinese imports starting on the 1st of November, in response to Beijing's new export controls on rare earth minerals. This is a space we've been following literally every day this week because it has truly global implications. These restrictions have reignited fears of a supply-side squeeze and undermined a series of temporary truces designed to pause the trade conflict. The current trade ceasefire, under which Washington suspended 145% duties while Beijing resumed rare earth exports, is due to expire on the 10th of November. Bessent and He Fang have already met in 4 rounds of talks in European capitals this year, and the upcoming Malaysia meeting could determine whether a longer-term peace is achievable. National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett echoed the optimism, telling Fox Business that he had, quote, high confidence, end quote, that Trump and Bessent could steer negotiations, quote, to a place that's good for both countries, end quote. For now, Washington's tone suggests an attempt to calm markets and reassure allies that despite the threats, a US-China trade rupture remains avoidable if Beijing plays ball. The big question remains around rare earths, however, because this not just affects the Americans, but folks all around the world. As we've discussed, the Europeans are not very happy with this, the Japanese are not very happy with this, and we'll have to see in the coming days how Beijing is going to respond to both US threats of tariffs and global concerns regarding this new regime. Next up, China's electric vehicle offensive shows no sign of slowing. In September, the nation's exports of EVs doubled from a year earlier to 222,000 units, according to the China Association of Automobile Manufacturers, CAAM. Even though that figure was slightly below August's record 224,000 units, it shows the global reach of Chinese automakers, who are racing to ship their surplus capacity overseas as profits at home evaporate in an increasingly ferocious price war, a state of affairs that has pushed the entire industry and secondary industries that support it to the brink. Domestic passenger car sales rose 11.2% year-on-year in September, down from 15% in August. The traditional golden September season brought a flurry of new model launches, but domestic demand could not keep pace with the tidal wave of vehicles pouring off production lines. With national capacity exceeding 50 million vehicles a year, enough to meet more than half of global demand, China has effectively built itself into a workshop of the world's auto industry. The United States, by comparison, manufactures about 10 million cars annually. In China, the result has been brutal. Collapsing profit margins, dealership bankruptcies, and what industry insiders are calling an, quote, export or die, in quote, ultimatum. Quote, currently new car sales for dealers are experiencing extensive losses, in quote, warned Cui Dongshu, Secretary General of the China Passenger Car Association, adding, quote, operating at cash flow negative and risks to a crash in cash flow are widespread. End quote. Overcapacity at home is translated into an unprecedented global export surge. China is on track to ship a record 7 million vehicles this year, up from just 1 million in 2020, reaching more than 100 countries in every time zone except North America. No other country in automotive history has expanded its export footprint so rapidly. Nowhere is the momentum clearer than in Europe. BYD, China's EV powerhouse, said the United Kingdom has become its largest overseas market, with sales soaring 880% year-on-year in September. MG, Chery, and other Chinese brands are similarly thriving. Quote, the Chinese accounted for 13% of new car sales in September, end quote, said Peter Fleet, former Ford China CEO, during a recent visit to London, adding, quote, I have that number going to 30% within 2 years, end quote. Western executives have been caught off guard. Quote, the rapid Chinese advancement is the most humbling thing I've ever seen, end quote, admitted Ford CEO Jim Farley. Beijing's strategy appears almost textbook. Scale up to dominate capacity, flood in to capture market share through aggressive pricing, and then starve out competitors by tightening control over critical inputs. Indeed, this final step may be already underway. As we know, China last week imposed new limits on exports of rare earth magnets and other battery materials vital to EV production. With 90% of global refining and 93% of magnet manufacturing under Chinese control, the move threatens to cripple Western car makers already struggling to compete on cost. This week, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent expressed, quote, they want to pull everyone else down with them, end quote. As regular viewers of the channel know, the implications go far beyond automobiles. Rare earth metals also power wind turbines, smartphones, and even America's F-35 fighter jets, which contains nearly 900 pounds of such materials. The risk is not simply about cars, but about technological sovereignty itself. Yet China's own industry is far from invincible. The same forces propelling its global expansion are devastating its domestic retail network. Price wars and oversupply have shredded dealership profitability. Quote, old wounds haven't healed while contracting new diseases, end quote, said Cui Dongshu, who we just quoted before. Most of China's top 14 dealership groups have seen both revenue and profits fall over the past 6 years, while inventories remain stubbornly high. Average net margins have dipped into the red for the first time since at least 2019. Even BYD, whose global success has become a symbol of Chinese industrial prowess, saw its domestic sales drop 5.5% in September, the first decline since February 2024. Earlier this year, 2 BYD dealership groups went bankrupt, leaving hundreds of customers stranded without insurance or unable to collect vehicles they had already paid for. BMW too cut its earnings guidance partly because of payments to support its Chinese dealerships. Quote, it's hard to escape this fight for survival, end quote, Cui lamented. The government has urged automakers to end the price war and accelerate payments to suppliers and dealers, but with limited success. Subsidies for new energy vehicle trade-ins have bolstered demand in some regions, yet local constraints are forcing many cities to suspend such incentives. If China's objective, as Xi Jinping put it back in 2020, is to, quote, make the world more dependent on China and China less dependent on the world, end quote, its auto strategy is succeeding with breathtaking speed. But Beijing's triumph carries growing geopolitical costs. The US and Canada have already imposed stiff tariffs on Chinese-made EVs, while the European Union is investigating state subsidies that underwrite their low prices. Indeed, one of the biggest factors behind China's dominance in EVs is massive state support. As a result, Chinese automakers are pivoting toward emerging markets in the Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia, regions eager for affordable electrification and less concerned about trade politics. Meanwhile, Western manufacturers are reeling. Collectively, they sell 8 million fewer vehicles in China today than 5 years ago. German car makers, once dominant, are on track to produce their fewest vehicles since 2000 outside of crisis years. Volkswagen, Mercedes, and others are closing plants and laying off tens of thousands of workers. So what now? The battle lines are drawn, China has scaled up, flooded in, and now is starving out competitors through control of materials and markets. What remains uncertain is how the rest of the world will respond, and for how long the pain back home from this massive overcapacity and collapsed profit margins can be sustained. Building new supply chains and securing access to critical minerals will require unprecedented coordination among governments and industry. If the West fails to act collectively, it may soon find that the entire global mobility ecosystem, along with the technologies that power it, runs on China's terms. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Have a good weekend, have a restful weekend, and I hope to see you for a new week of developments on Monday.